In today's lesson, we're going to learn how to do equations and inequalities. So I don't want you guys to be alarmed when you see these signs over here. These are what I call easy marks over here. This is easy marks. Okay, so let me show you how easy these things are. We're given that x squared plus 2x minus 3 is greater than 0. So what does this sign mean? It means positive, right? It means positive. So what are they basically asking us? They're asking us, where is this graph, right? Where is this graph greater than 0? And we know that this graph is a parabola because it is in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. But you guys are used to ax squared plus q, right? But in grade 11 as well as in grade 12, you're going to be introduced to this equation over here, which is the standard form for a parabola. So the first thing we should do is to make sure that there's nothing on the right-hand side. Then after that, we must change this inequality to a equals to sign. But we must make sure that we put something called CV. What is CV? CV, it's not a curriculum vitae. It's what we call critical values. It's what we call critical values. So our critical values are basically our x-intercepts that we're going to find. So we have x squared plus 2x minus 3 is equals to 0. And I'm going to put a CV next to it to show that I'm collecting my critical values. So this is a standard trinomial because it's in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. So I'm going to factor out the x's, make it equal to 0, put an x over there and an x over there. Remember, since we're going to take the factors of 3, and since we have a 2 in the middle, the bigger one is going to get a positive, and the smaller one is going to get a negative, because 3 minus 1 is equals to 2, and 3 times negative 1 will give me negative 3. So x is equals to negative 3, or x is equals to 1. Then after that, you're going to draw a line, a number line. Then you're going to draw a parabola, just like that. Then you're going to place the smaller number first, which is negative 3 in this case, and the bigger one last, which is 1. Then after that, what you're going to do, you're going to look at your inequality sign over here. What does that say? It means greater than, meaning positive. So what I want you guys to think about this graph, right? That this graph is basically f of x. And f of x, we know that is y. So basically, this question is asking us, where are the y values greater than 0? Meaning, where are the y values positive? Where are the y values positive? Where is f of x greater than 0, basically? So what we're going to do is we're going to look in this region over here. This region over here and this region over here. Because why? In this region, all y values over here and all y values over here will be positive. But if we look in this region over here below the x-axis, the y values will be negative. So we're not looking for that. We're not looking for that. No, 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 no. We're looking for where the graph is positive. So a little hack. I want you guys to look over here and put an arrow this side. When it's positive, put an arrow that side and put an arrow over there. Then you look at the number below the arrow, negative 3. And your inequality sign will point in the direction where the arrow is going. So the arrow is going in the left. So x should be less than negative 3, right? Just like that. Or you point that arrow over there, x should be greater than 1. So what does this mean? They say for any x value less than 3, meaning that whatever x value that you plug into this equation over here, the y value will always stay positive. or for any x value greater than 1, meaning any x value that you plug in here, which is 2, 3, 4, and infinity, the y values will always stay positive. But in between here, which we will deal with in the next slide, the y values will always be negative. We given that 8x squared is less than negative 4x. So the first thing we should do is we must make sure that there's a 0 on the right hand side. So we're going to take this negative 4x to the other side. So it's going to be 8x squared plus 4x is less than 0. Then after there, we're going to change the inequality sign to a equals to sign, but don't forget to place your critical values. So 8x squared plus 4x is equals to 0. Then you can factor out. We can take out a 4x as a common factor because why? When we divide 8x squared by 4x, we're going to get 2x. And when we divide 4x by 4x, we're going to get 1 is equals to 0. Apply the zero factor law. 4x is equals to 0, or 2x plus 1 is equals to 0. When you solve for x is equals to 0, or x is equals to negative a half. Now, you draw your number line, you draw your parabola, then you place the smaller number first and the bigger number last. Then after there, this is where things change. When you look at your inequality sign, as you can see over here, we have a less than sign. We have a less than sign. So we're going to be looking in this region over here. What you guys can do is you can point your arrow in this direction, because before you used to pointing your arrow in this direction and in this direction. So in this case, since you're working in this region, you need to point your arrow in this direction and in that direction over there. Then your inequality sign will face the arrow's direction. So x should be greater than a half, or x should be less than 0. But I don't typically like this method. Specifically for this one, there's a different method in which we can use, where we can just place our x in the middle, right? And we can place two inequality signs looking at the left. And we can put the lowest number first, the smallest number, which is negative a half, and the biggest number, which is 0. So any x value that lies between, this is the explanation for this equation, for this inequality that we just created. It says for any x value that lies between negative a half and 0, then the y values will be negative in this region. Because why? The graph is below the x-axis over there. So any x value that lies between these two numbers, or these 2 points over here, right, then the y values will be negative. We're given that negative x squared minus 5x plus 6 is greater than and equals to 0. So don't be alarmed. It's still the same procedure. It's just that we're going to include our numbers. Before, in previous questions, we were not including our numbers because they didn't want us to include it. But in this case, we're going to include our numbers. So now, since we have a negative, and please take note, when you divide by a negative, when you divide everything by a negative, your inequality changes. Reason why? This is a negative parabola. It looks something like this. And what do they want? They want for which values of x is f of x greater than 0. So you're going to be looking in this region over here specifically, right? You're going to be looking in that region over here. Because why? This graph is only positive over here. But when we look at a positive parabola, right, we're going to be looking in this region over here. As you can see, that we're always going to be looking in the values between two x-intercepts, right? We're going to be looking in the values between two x-intercepts. That's why I say when you divide everything by a negative, you're going to change the inequality sign. So we're going to divide everything by a negative 1. divide everything by a -1. The sign will change. So x squared plus 5x minus 6 is less than and equals to 0. That's the first step. Make sure that you change the inequality sign. Then after that, you collect your critical values. X squared plus 5x minus 6 is equals to 0. Factor out, place an x over there, an x over there, make it equal to 0. Take out the factors of 6, which is 6 and 1. Bigger one's going to get a positive, smaller one's going to get a negative. X is equals to minus 6, or x is equals to 1. Then you draw your parabola just like that. Well, that's a terrible parabola, but it's fine. -6 comes first and the 1 comes after. Then you're going to be looking in this region over here. And I told you a little hack is you can place the x in between over here and place the less than signs in between there, and the smaller number will come first and the bigger number will come last. But don't forget, it's included. So you're going to include both of those signs. If it was greater than, you would say that x should be less than -6, or x is greater than and equals to 1. If it was like this, and this was a positive, just like that. And if you guys do prefer scientific notation, you could say that x is an element from, and since we're including, we're going to put square brackets, right? -6 will come first and 1 will come after. And you're including those two numbers over there. We're given that x squared plus 10x plus 16 is less than and equals to 0. So collect your critical values. X squared plus 10x plus 16 is equals to 0. Factor out x and x. You have 8 and 2. Both will be positive and make it equal to 0. X is equals to -8, or x is equals to -2. You draw your line just like that, your parabola. Then after there, you draw the smallest number first, must come, and then the bigger number comes last, -2. Then after there, you're looking in this region over here. But I told you guys that you can use the method where you can put an x in between these two numbers. The smaller number will come first and the bigger number will come last, just like that. So x must lie between -8 and -2. If you prefer scientific notation, you can say x is an element. X is an element, and you include both of them. Don't forget to include these ones as well. -8 and -2. And those are your final answers. So only choose one. If you prefer this one, choose this one and stick with it throughout. If you prefer scientific notation, stick with scientific notation and stick with it throughout.